Elizabeth, and today I'm here to do another tag video. This is the Your Readership Tag that was created by Dalton at Scriptcover Lit, and I was tagged by Mark at Richardson Reads, and I'm going to leave links to both of their videos down below. And with that, on to the questions. Number one is, who influenced your beginning as a reader? And for me, the answer is the obvious one: my parents. Neither of them were big readers when I grew up, but they always read to me and my brother before bedtime every single night. They alternated. And so from an early age, I was read to. It started with comics, it was also books, and I think that really was what got me started as a reader, having literature and books and just all this text being a part of my everyday life from a very early age. They were also the ones who took me to the library for the first time, where I could get whatever I want and however much I wanted. And then they let me have my own library card when I was 8, I think, so I could go there alone. And that was a very impactful thing in my life. So question 2 is, what is the first book you remember? And I really don't know what the true answer to this question is, so I'm gonna come as close as I can get, because I can't remember not being a reader. I've learned to read by myself when I was 3 or 4, so I really can't remember not being able to read, and I have no idea of the order I read books in or what the first things I actually read were. I do know that I learned reading by reading comics, like single issue children's comics like Winnie the Pooh and Donald Duck and others, Tom and Jerry, and those were probably the first things I read. I also remember a book I read fairly early on that made a big impression on me, that was called Gummi-Tarzan or Rubber Tarzan, which was written by a Danish author called Ole Lund Kirkegaard, I think. And that book was about a young kid called Ivan Olsen, and he was bullied at school by his teacher and by his fellow students because he was weak and because he was bad at reading, and he couldn't do stuff in gym class, and then he came home and he was teased by his father as well. And then one day he meets a witch and she grants him a wish, and he wished that every wish he has will come true. And so he gets super strong and super good at reading, and he's super good at spitting, which was one of the things he was teased for not being able to do. And that really left an impression on me, particularly the reading part, because he was a poor reader, but after being granted these wishes, he went to the library to get the biggest book they had, and it was as big as a refrigerator, and there's a drawing of him carting it home on a small cart and reading it, and he suddenly had no problem in reading that book. And yeah, that's one of the earliest books I remember reading, but probably this is also one of my earliest ones, which is called My Big Picture Book, 365 Tales, which is just basically one tale for each day of the year. And my parents have read this to me and my younger brother several times. But I remember this was a big choice when you came to January 1st, because if you chose this book to be the bedtime read, then you were locked in for the year. So you had to really be sure that this was what you wanted for the entire year to come if we picked this. But we did go through it several times. And there are some short tales in here that we could sneak in something else on the side. Question 3 is, what is the first book that impacted you? And this is impossible to answer. I think all books impact you in some way or another. I would say reading Lord of the Rings for the first time had a massive influence on me, just because it proved to me that you could read fantasy as an adult as well. I would say that probably some of the books we were introduced to in class from 7th grade, when we started learning about Norwegian literary history, had a massive impact on me, because that they made me realize that there were all these classics out there and that they weren't like dusty old tomes. There were histories and stories that I found super fascinating, and it made me read a lot of these books outside of class as well, and those hadn't been part of my reading before then. So let's say that's my answer. Question 4 is, what author was your first love? And I would say Carolyn Keene, which wrote the Nancy Drew novels, and I was so crushed when I realized that this was not an actual person, but rather a pen name shared by a bunch of different people to write this series. And that felt like such a betrayal to find out that Carolyn Keene was not an actual person. As for an actual author, the answer has to be Roald Dahl, because I really loved his books growing up. I took them out of the library over and over again, at least the ones that were actually at my local library. I've since discovered that there were some gaps in their collection, but I think my favorite was BFG. That really spoke to me as a child. Question 5 is, what book has been on your TBR for too long? And I guess someone would argue that there's a lot of books that's been on my TBR for too long, because I have a library filled with books that have been there for years and years and I haven't read them yet. Decades for some of them. But I'm not too stressed about that. But I had to pick something for this answer, and I went with Histories by Herodotus, because judging by my interests and the other books I read, I really think I should have read this already, but I haven't. So I should probably make this a priority this year, because I am really curious about reading this, and I have read quotes from it in so many other books. But have I read the original? No, haven't. Question 6 is, what is your go-to suggestion for a reader? I don't have one book I would suggest to just about anyone. I think my main suggestion would be to find a book about a topic that interests you. So if you're interested in football, read a book about football or whatever. I think that's a good way to get into reading, is to just sneak it in through something you're already interested in. I mean, there's books written about just about any topic, so whatever interests you, I'm sure there's a book about it. Question 7 is, what are you currently reading? And I finished my main read yesterday, so I've just started 2 books. And I'm also listening to the audiobook of Daisy Jones and the Six, which everybody on BookTube has been talking about. And I'm really liking that audiobook. It's a full cast audiobook with lots of voices for all the different characters. So it's an engaging book to listen to. But I've also started this, which is Janet Frame, Faces in the Water. One of the books I mentioned in the haul with Celia. This is about a woman who's in a mental institution and she's not treated very well. I'm 2 chapters into this and I'm really liking the writing. And it's heartbreaking reading about how she is treated. So I think this is going to be a powerful read. And I also started that other book from that haul, which is this one, Medieval Bodies, Life, Death and Art in the Middle Ages by Jack Hartnell, which talks about how the human body was viewed in the medieval times, which is a long period in history. So I think this is going to be super interesting. I've only read the first chapter so far, but the writing is really good and really engaging. So I'm looking forward to the rest. I mean, I was inspired to pick this up when we made that haul, and a lot of the comments were very positive to this book, and it made me remember that I had bought it, and reminded me I wanted to read this sooner rather than later. And so far, so good. But as I said, 22 pages in. And then there's a bonus question to end it with. How has literature touched or influenced you? And I would say literature has been a major influence in my life. It's been my main interest since I was a child. As I said, I've always been a reader. It's been part of my day for mostly every day for all of my life, either as being read to or having read myself. I chose education based on it. I've done journalism, which was me wanting to write. I then went on to do creative writing, which was about wanting to make literature. And then eventually I also studied linguistics, which was also stems from my interest in language and how language works. And then in 2009 I started a Norwegian book blog, and through that I got to know a lot of lovely people. So it has really had an effect on my social life as well, because a lot of these people are now my friends, and starting to feel the same way about people here on BookTube, so more international friendships as well. So I would say literature has influenced my life in many ways, and it is still part of my day every single day. There is very rarely a day when I don't read anything at all. And then I'm supposed to tag someone, but this tag is so old by now and I haven't really done my research, so I don't know who's done it already. So I'm gonna try to tag someone in the description box below when I have checked if there are someone who hasn't done this already. And until next time, bye bye.